A very warm welcome to you, and thanks for joining us on this session, this lightning lesson, where we're asking the question, do we need to rethink human in the loop for real AI governance? Now, we're hoping for some great audience participation. Please use the chat to add questions as we go through, and at the end, we'll see if we can pick up some of those questions and provide you with answers. Great. So we are going to proceed to the first slide, Paul, if I can ask you to do that. Thank you. So we're going to start with a poll. A simple question, and this is what we're asking you. Can human in the loop help with AI governance or hinder it? The answers are help, hinder, or don't know. And I'm going to launch this poll and let's share the results. So, Paul, would you like to take from here?
Excellent. Thank you, Marcus. We're going to have a fairly straightforward lesson structure. We'll look at the case against human in the loop. We'll look through some examples. We'll make the case for human in the loop. And really, one of the huge takeaways around this is getting your definitions right, because people talk about it and we don't necessarily know what they actually mean. We will then look at a rental car case study, and we'll ask you to diagnose this through the polling system. We'll introduce transparency, talk about what we mean about meaningful human in the loop, and then look at the future and the takeaways. Let's get going. So let's make the case against human in the loop. What are the big tech companies, the titans in the industry saying? We've got an example from Amazon. Humans are not terribly consistent. Human in the loop isn't necessarily the gold standard. Okay, the first part I can probably agree. We are not consistent. We all know that. We all get up in the morning in a mood or not. Then Elon Musk, who always has an opinion. Human involvement introduces latency and inefficiency, particularly for high-speed systems. Yeah, I can see exactly where he's going with that. That makes a lot of sense. And then Palantir, the CEO, Alex Karp. There's no moral high ground in using inferior technology, even if it allows you to say things like, we never let a robot decide who lives and who dies. So on the surface, it appears that the tech giants, the tech people, the people we look up to, maybe, they're not really a fan of having humans in the loop. Let's just dive into this a little bit more. I'm going to start off with a story. This isn't using AI, but it's a good analog. So Air France AF 447 was flying from Rio de Janeiro to Paris. It was flying at altitude. Ice formed in the pitot tube so that the plane could no longer detect speed. It started to get confused, and the autopilot disengaged and threw it straight back to the humans. The humans had alarms, they had alerts, and they really couldn't make sense of what was going on due to the conflicting information. And unfortunately, the plane crashed. So we could see this as a human in the loop, a safety layer, if you like, where the humans take over when the AI fails. But actually, in this case, it didn't work with technology that even is not AI. I'm going to refer to a study. We've provided the links, the short links. We don't collect the data, we don't sell the data, so you're free to look at the studies that we show in this talk, in this lesson. And the key findings were manual control and instrument scanning stay intact. So the basic aspects of flying remained, so there was no issues there. However, the cognitive skills degrade. So if you're relying on the autopilot, if you're relying on the technology, you're not using your brain, then your skills degrade. And I think we can all probably buy into that. And if you're like me, mind wandering hurts performance. If I'm not concentrating on something and my mind wanders, it can take me a while to get back into focus and deal with what's in front of me. So performance goes down. And the really interesting part is this: failures and abnormal situations are challenging. So in this case of Air France 447, there was a failure, it was abnormal. The pilots perhaps had mind wandering going on, their cognitive skills had degraded a little bit, they found it challenging. And was it really fair for them to take over in this scenario? And it didn't work and they crashed. So that's an example of something that isn't AI, but we can understand the same stresses of relying on technology that suddenly throws it back to a human. I want to look at another example now: high frequency trading. There have been numerous stories in the press where these systems can cause flash crashes and cause lots of problems. So we can have millions of orders in the time it takes a human to blink. So what we're saying is, how can we control something when our neurons haven't fired? So we're not able to recognize something until it's too late, the market has crashed, and in this case, human in the loop doesn't make a lot of sense. So we appear to be building the case that fits in with the tech giants. Ideally, we need a circuit breaker. When it looks like the markets are going to fall out of bed, we need an intervention. We're asking our humans to take over, but actually the crash has occurred. So whether or not you've got a circuit breaker doesn't matter. It's too late. There's nothing the humans can do about it. So it appears that we've stacked the cards against the humans and we're ruling them out in AI governance. So that's the case against human in the loop. Now, what I want to do is talk about some clarity. Let's take a typical simple model of artificial intelligence, AI. So we observe the data, we learn, we update, we decide, then we act, and we go around the loop again and again and again. If we now apply human in the loop, we have the same loop, the same first three stages. We introduce the human. So in this loop, the human must review and approve, and then we act. We go round, and then perhaps this is where we meet Elon Musk. If we're going around and round and round, each time we're waiting for the human to approve. And that doesn't seem as though it's something that's going to be scalable. And in fact, that's what Microsoft have said in the past. Human in the loop is not scalable. But what do we actually mean by human in the loop? So if we look at what actions, tasks that a human might need to provide, it could be supervising, improving, collaborating, or to be the safety layer, as in the Air France 447. So if we're supervising, we're reviewing and approving. So in this case, the human is perhaps being the supervisor. If we're improving, we're guiding and we're refining, but doesn't quite fit the loop. If we're collaborating, it means align and steer. So perhaps, again, we're not quite fitting in with this model. And if it's the safety layer, well, monitor and intervene. Well, in this case, the human's in the loop. It's not really monitoring because it's acting on each transaction. If we now remove the human in the loop element, what we're saying now is it will cost you, boss, it'll cost the company, and potentially it will cost society. What do we mean by that? We're talking about the oh no moment. Something catastrophic occurs with the AI. It's oh no, things collapse. What could possibly happen in this scenario? Well, the human has to pick up the pieces. The AI isn't going to do it. There's no programming, there's no ability, there's no functionality for any of the AI to pick up the pieces. So the human has to wade in, roll up the sleeves, and pick up the pieces. What does this mean? We now face liabilities. So if it's an EV that's crashed and killed someone, that's potentially the product. Or it could be the company that hasn't run through the testing process, hasn't approved it, there hasn't been certifications. Or it could be the employee in negligence. Or if it was a hospital, the hospital itself could be negligent for using a robot in surgery. So what this actually exposes is tolerable losses. What do we mean by that? If we don't have a human somewhere assisting the AI, we're accepting the losses. Are we accepting death? Are we accepting the costs? The insurance won't pay. We're going to be up against litigation. We're going to be sued. We're going to face fines. Or if you're Elon, the regulators are going to come knocking on the door. And as we all know, Elon doesn't like the regulators. So there's a notion of tolerable losses. Whether you know about them or not, you're going to have to live with those losses. So if we're making the case for human involvement, we're saying, okay, you might not be in the loop, but you're going to have to pick up all the issues and all the problems afterwards. The AI is not a human. It doesn't have agency. You can't sue the AI, so you have to go and sue the humans in this chain. So let's introduce the owner of the loop. We move from human involvement and human in the loop to the owner of the loop. So let's go back to our high frequency trading. We have to stop. Something has gone terribly wrong. We have to use the circuit breaker. We can't. We're not able to. It's too late. We've now accepted the tolerable losses. So if we go back to our human in the loop process, what we're actually saying is, as a model, it's invalid because execution speed and scaling does not work. We can try and argue against it, but that is a reality that we're going to have to accept. So in reality, what does that mean? Our human in the loop suddenly is no longer viable. We end up with human in the loophole. We might have staff, we might have traders, we might have supervisors, but actually the power has been taken away because of the way the model works, the way the economics work, and we end up with governance optics without governance substance. So this could be your job. You're there to be part of the governance, but actually you don't have any power. So this takes us back to stacking the liabilities and the tolerable losses. We end up with an alarm case scenario. The management within the company or the organization or the owners, they are the owners of the loop. So we've neatly moved from human in the loop to owning the loop and facing the consequences. So there we make the case for perhaps not human in the loop, but it's inevitable. You cannot avoid the human being involved somewhere. It's going to be someone in the hierarchy, an owner somewhere. And this is where we need to get back to clarity. So when people talk about human in the loop, what are they really talking about? And we can come up with 6 ways of looking at this. We've got human on the loop. So the AI is working autonomously. The human is there purely for monitoring and intervention. We've got human in the loop. So we've already seen this. Review and approve. We're in there. We're looking at every single transaction. And then when human in the loop fails, you've got human in the loophole where there's an escape. The human isn't able to do anything but catches the flak. So we have the governance optics without the governance substance. And now, more importantly, you've got human before the loop. Here we define our objectives, our data, the guardrails. What do we do before pre-deployment? We have high influence, but we are far away from when the problems occur. If we've got an issue, a crash, the before side of things cannot do anything. If anything emerges, it's too late. So we have the biggest impact on the functioning of the AI by everything that we decide ahead of time, yet we're unable to take action if something goes wrong in the instant, in the microsecond that these things tend to occur in. And then we've got human out of the loop where the model is running and there is no human oversight whatsoever. It's completely automated. And finally, we've got human after the loop. It's gone wrong. There's a big bang, and you have to clean up. Accountability. How do you then find out and go to the before stage, find out what went wrong, what were the design issues, and where did it fail in production? So when we're talking in human in the loop, we're actually talking about six aspects, and they need to be clearly defined, and we need to understand where the problems are if we're going to take action. We are now going to ask you to help us with the case study. So in the polling, we'll ask you to identify the root cause. And we're going to ask you to vote on, after, in, before, loophole, or out. So if I just quickly outline the story. So the car rental firm decided to introduce technology for car returns. So when you return the car would be scanned. If there were any problems, scratches, dents, a report would be produced, and then you might have to pay something, or it goes against the insurance. However, what happened was that there could have been a leaf, there could have been a watermark, there could have been some dust, and the damages to the car were being incorrectly classified, that we were getting false positives. And not only that, when there were problems, the staff couldn't do anything. You know, if a staff member was there overlooking the process, they were in the loop, they could see it was just some water, a water drop or a leaf or something on the car, they would be able to refuse that error, and off we would go. But worse than that, these reports were produced from cars that weren't being scanned, so from previous data sets, from previous occurrences, and the staff being unable to do anything about it meant that the customers were landed with the bills, and they would ask for help, and the humans would then blame the scanner, blame the AI. Sorry, I can't do anything. It's the AI. So in conclusion then, the AI was unleashed into the business. The before the loop work carried out did the best it could, but there were downstream consequences. And then we get back to this notion of the hierarchy of the management, the owners of the company having to own the problem, perhaps when it's far too late. So I'm now going to hand over to Marcus, and Marcus will recap, and then we'll ask you to vote.
Thank you, Paul. So yeah, let's just recap and highlight the key points raised in this case. There was no meaningful human oversight or the ability to intervene, no clear route for customers to challenge or appeal the decision. Too much trust was placed in the automated system, with responsibility being placed elsewhere. Now, false positives can have serious real-world consequences, like customers getting automatically charged without consequence. Decisions made using incorrect data or without enough context. And charges were eventually dropped, but only after persistence and repeated challenges. So what this tells us is that even with high human presence, there was little meaningful oversight. There were automated decisions that could not be challenged. And there was a failure to meet the transparency obligations. So I'm going to launch the poll, and I'd ask you all to vote. And let's share the results. Well, it's a fairly even split. Nobody thinks it's human in the loop, human on the loop or human after the loop, but an even split with in the loop, before the loop, in the loophole, and out of the loop. And with that, I'm going to hand back to Paul. Thank you, Paul.
Thank you, Marcus. So we will come back and we will actually dive into this, but there's a little bit of work we need to do ahead of that. So I'm going to give you a tool here, how we can gauge meaningful human in the loop. And it's a simple system in terms that we follow a chain. So we have to be able to observe. We need to understand. So if you think about the pilots, they observe a problem. They need to understand what's going on, but they're getting conflicting information. Then they have to decide. They've got to make the right decision and then intervene. So what we're doing is we're saying that we need to be able to comprehend, we need to have agency, we need to have authority, and we need to have accountability. And that split we can see is this. So to have authority, you've got to be able to observe all the data. So there's no point in using investigators or staff members if they don't have the authority to go and dig up all the logs. Then we need to understand, we need to decide, and then, of course, have the intervention. So the authority to decide and to intervene and to take action. And we will come back to this later in terms of workplace obligations. So once you're sure that you've got the authority, you've got to have the comprehension. So in the high frequency example, you observe, you understand, but it's too late. It's already happened. The crash has occurred. And when you look at the agency, you've got to be in a position. There's no point having everything locked up on your aeroplane. You've got to have the agency to decide and press all the buttons you need to intervene and take action. And then afterwards, we need to be able to go backwards and understand what happened. So therefore, there's an element of accountability. There's logging. The decisions have to be written up, understood, the rationale. So you need to have that accountability to go backwards just in case you need to fix something. Again, if we go through the high frequency trading scenario, what we find is that there is no comprehension because it's happened too fast. And if you don't have the comprehension, you certainly don't have the agency. But in your job role, you might have the authority. You have been given the authority to see everything and act. So that's great. You've got the authority, but you've not had the agency, so you can't do anything. Similarly, it could be your job on the line. You're the one that gets hauled in front of regulators. So the accountability is there. So what we find is that we've got a totally unsatisfactory scenario if you are involved in the governance of the high frequency trading platforms and technology. Let's now go back into the car rental case study. So we'll do the observe, understand, decide, and intervene, and we'll apply the comprehension, agency, accountability, and authority tests. So before the loop, what was designed and was everything considered, and how were they going to manage the emergent problems? And we can see that actually there were great failures here. They can't be involved in the actual AI chain, but there's no way for them to get information back from the end results. After the loop, in the story, we saw that customers were complaining, the staff were blaming the AI systems, and the customers had a horrendous time trying to resolve their uncalled for charges. So clear failings in the after the loop part of our story. On the loop, well, we didn't see any evidence of on the loop. On the loop means there is a management function to monitor, to see if there are deviations, and then to intervene if required. So completely lacking in terms of this loop. Out of the loop, well, actually, this is how the system operated. It operated completely independently with no one able to join in, to stop it, to make changes or to slow it down or to override decisions. So we had a system working out of the loop. In the loop, there were people in the loop, but there was nothing they could do to help the system process data correctly and process customers correctly. So we ended up with our staff in the loophole. They were there for governance purposes, but they were unable to affect or impact any kind of change. So you can see we might have been able to observe and understand and see things were going wrong, but there was no ability to decide. No one had the authority. No one had the accountability. No one had the agency. So we can all see things were going wrong, but we had things fall apart. So in conclusion then, to answer the poll question, the cause the root cause was before the loop, but the symptom was in the loophole. It's like going to a doctor with backache, and actually the backache isn't what's wrong with you, it's somewhere else in the body. So we've got the difference between the symptom and the causes. So what can we do about this? Well, we can introduce transparency. If we've got transparency across the board, after the loop, we've got procedures, processes, your staff can intervene, they can deal with customers, they can make life easier for those that have come off badly from being overbilled for things that they didn't expect to be billed for. Similarly, transparency on the loop. Do we actually have someone there? Is there a management function there? How and what are the thresholds that they operate at? Has that been defined? And going back to before the loop, well, we've designed the system. Can anyone find out how it's intended to work, especially on the loop? And can we determine if there's been deviation? And will the before the loop stage, the designers, the programmers, will they be able to pick up on what's gone wrong and then put it back into the process? So we can see that the car rental story is a classic case of things going completely wrong. And it's not even mission critical. People aren't going to die because of this. They're going to be massively inconvenienced through their billing. And a good way forward would be to have the transparency across the board so that we can fix problems as they come along. So, meaningful human in the loop. What do we mean by this? To have meaningful human control, you have to have transparency. We're calling this transparency obligations, so that from beginning to end, after, on the loop, you have to be transparent. Understand what you need to do, understand the threshold, understand when you need to take action, when you need to pull the plug. If you don't have that, you don't have meaningful human in the control. Once we've got meaningful human under control, we can begin to manage our losses. We can begin to bear down on the liabilities because we can take action. So it benefits the organization if we're able then to stamp down on these liabilities and prevent things going wrong. But what about the staff who are in the system? You're monitoring them, you're looking at their actions, you're logging every movement. So a similar scenario might be someone working in a warehouse. You're monitoring everything that they do. Well, is that appropriate for the workplace? Are people going to accept being monitored if we're trying to manage the AI process and look at all the decisions they're making? And do they have the ability to challenge the AI? Can they pull the plug? Can they stop the AI? So what we're really saying is there's a heap of work to be done in the HR department to ensure that our workplace regulations are taken care of, that our employment contracts and our staff members accept being monitored in the logs and for the actions they are taking. So the workplace regulations are effectively the piece that brings our entire chain together and makes human in the loop actually work. Interestingly, and I found this story on the internet, again, you can use the link to read more, workers are being punished for ignoring AI advice, even when the outcome is better. So you can see immediately the workplace regulations haven't been thought through appropriately. And we can come up with a set of questions. Trust and judgment. When should people trust the AI versus their own judgment? And are the incentives aligned or misaligned? If you keep going against the AI, do you lose your job? And the bias towards technology. We saw with the car rental company, the staff would immediately say, it's the AI's fault. So there's a bias towards technology. Accountability. Can our staff members, can our humans on the shop floor, in the factory, do the right thing? Or are they simply following the system and not able to do the right thing? Again, this takes us back to the workplace regulations. and the accountability when the AI is involved. Who has the final authority, the human or the machine? And finally, the bias. Are we evaluating our staff, and depending on how they are dealing with the AI systems, have the incentives been designed properly? And what about the tools and metrics? Do we have the right tools? Do we have the right metrics? So as you can see, even before you talk about human in the loop, you need to go back to your workplace and understand how people are going to operate in the world of AI. We're coming towards the end of the course now, and I want to just go through some takeaways and to talk about the future direction for human in the loop. As we saw, scale and speed can massively impact human in the loop. If we're not careful, we walk straight into tolerable losses, even if we know about them or not. We can end up with harms if we're into harms, people dying, market losses. We can end up with liabilities either at the company level or at the individual level. So we're talking about humans being accountable at the company leadership or human level. And really what we're saying is we've moved from human in the loop to human owns the loop. So what can be done? We need to work on our strategy. We need to be responsible design first. As we saw with the car rental, we've got to work on the human before the loop. This is where we can make the massive difference on the potential outcomes. Yet, we need to ally the human before the loop with the oversight, monitoring, benchmark, and transparency. And then we need to manage, we need to understand, where are we in the loop? Are we in the in, on, out, before, after, or are we facing the loophole? And if we label these up, the top level is about risk. We're trying to minimize risk. We're trying to minimize failures. We're trying to minimize liabilities. To do that, we need feedback, and we've got to make sure that we are carrying out our management, especially the on the loop, monitor and then take action. And when we look at this, actually, we're starting to see that potentially there's a loop. We can't have a simple pass through. We're looking at perhaps we need a new loop. And that's what we're going to consider next going forward into the future. The direction of travel. If we take our existing loop, what we see is that if it's at scale, we cannot have someone in the loop because the transactions would be so slow. We can't do the millions of transactions per second. We're going to require AI. So we'll have the AI agent on the loop, and the AI agent on the loop will have to monitor, detect drift, and trigger actions, as well as audit what has gone on. Effectively, we have three layers. We have the execution level, we have the supervision, and then we have the strategy level. So human-led, AI-powered. We set the strategy, we work out the objectives, the ethics. So for cars, for the medical side, it could be no humans must ever die. The accountability, we have to ensure that the information bubbles back up, and we have to risk manage. We can't deal with a power station in the same way that we would deal with a fridge. So at the end of the day, what we're saying is, and this comes back again and again in AI governance, it's all about risk. And in a future lecture series, we'll come back and take a look at risk in detail. So overall, we can see that human in the loop doesn't always work because of scale and the problems that Elon Musk has pointed out. But we do have to move forward. We can't let the AI work without human intervention, because we will move from human in the loop to human ownership. So whether we like it or not, human-led at the end of the chain it will be a human who has to answer. And it could be your job if you're the CEO or someone responsible for the technology. It will come to you. So that concludes the lecture elements. I'm now going to pass back to Marcus.
Thank you, Paul, for that insightful walkthrough. Very thought-provoking. I'm hoping we might have a few questions for you. If anybody's got a question for Paul, perhaps you could just chuck it in the chat and we'll see if we can answer some. Okay, nothing forthcoming. So with that, I will move to close this session. But just before we finish, I just wanted to reiterate that the EU AI Act is now in force. Organisations need to show that the human oversight that Paul has discussed is genuine. It's not just a box ticking exercise. And that's the focus of our 2-hour course, AI Governance Beyond GDPR, being held on the 22nd of September. It explores how you can move from simply documenting decisions to taking real ownership of them. And you'll leave the course with 5-part practical framework you can use straight away. And Paul is going to drop a link to book your place in the chat now. So it just remains to say thank you very much indeed for your time. Enjoy the rest of your days, evenings, mornings, from whereverabouts in the world you are. And a big thank you from both Paul and myself.
And just before we go, on the screen, you've got the short code for the slides, or you can use the QR code. So thank you for your attendance.